Have you ever observed someone in a high-ranking position and thought, how did they possibly end up in charge? It's a familiar feeling, whether in government offices, executive boardrooms, or media platforms. We often see individuals who seem blatantly unfit for leadership being elevated, while more thoughtful, competent people are sidelined or ignored. Emperor Nero played music as Rome burned. Elizabeth Holmes built an empire around a medical illusion. These aren't isolated incidents. They form a repeating pattern that feels less like an error and more like a built-in feature of how power operates. What if this isn't random? What if there's a deeper structure, almost a dark algorithm, that consistently selects for the wrong kinds of people? To understand this, we turn to Niccolò Machiavelli, one of the most misunderstood minds in political philosophy. Writing from exile in 16th century Florence, Machiavelli observed not how rulers ought to behave, but how they actually maintain control. Everyone sees what you appear to be, he wrote, but few truly understand what you are. That single sentence unlocks a brutal truth. When it comes to influence, perception often eclipses reality. This is where the paradox begins. Because what society often perceives as leadership isn't competence, it's confidence. Machiavelli noted that intellectuals, those who see complexity and question their own thinking, tend to struggle in cutthroat environments. Intelligence often carries burdens, ethical hesitation, self-awareness, an unwillingness to reduce nuanced problems into simple slogans. These traits, while valuable for truth-seeking, are liabilities in environments that reward clarity over depth. Socrates, who famously said, "I know that I know nothing," was a beacon of philosophical insight, and yet he was sentenced to death by democratic consensus. In contrast, populists across history have ascended to dominance not because of their grasp of truth, but because of their ability to present illusions as certainties. A controversial 2017 paper in the Journal of Management proposed that intelligence correlates positively with leadership effectiveness. Until a certain point, beyond an IQ of roughly 120, intelligence becomes a hindrance in emerging as a leader. The explanation: highly intelligent individuals often struggle to connect with broader audiences. Their ideas are harder to digest. Their caution feels like indecision. They introduce ambiguity where people crave simplicity. As Leo Tolstoy observed, the most difficult subjects can be explained to the most slow-witted man if he has not formed any idea of them already. But the simplest thing cannot be made clear to the most intelligent man if he is firmly persuaded that he knows already. So if intelligence alone isn't the path to power, what is? The answer lies not in what someone knows, but in how confidently they can pretend to know everything. In systems driven by spectacle, certainty becomes more persuasive than truth. This opens the door to the next layer of the paradox: the psychological illusions that shape leadership selection in modern life. In the modern world, our minds are still wired for environments that no longer exist. The human brain is drawn to certainty because, in a more primitive era, quick judgments were often a matter of survival. But in the realm of leadership, this instinct backfires. We are seduced by those who sound sure even when they're wrong, and skeptical of those who appear thoughtful, even when they're right. This is why a mediocre thinker with unwavering conviction often defeats a wise one who speaks with caution. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger identified a cognitive bias that has come to define modern leadership dynamics: the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with limited ability tend to vastly overestimate their competence, while truly skilled individuals, aware of how much they don't know, underrate themselves. Shakespeare expressed it centuries earlier in As You Like It. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Machiavelli, too, understood this mechanism, not as an academic curiosity, but as a recurring tool of rulers in his world. The appearance of competence was more potent than competence itself. Contemporary studies confirm that overconfidence plays a significant role in who we view as a leader. A 2020 paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who projected strong self-assurance were more likely to be seen as leaders by their peers regardless of their actual skill level. In short, we trust the appearance of certainty more than demonstrable expertise. Consider military figures like General George Custer, whose disastrous decisions were fueled by ego and yet paved the way for his early rise. Or take the tech sector. Charismatic founders with grand visions often attract billions in investment, while more methodical, grounded innovators are overlooked. Adam Neumann of WeWork is a case in point, a man who, despite a chaotic business model, raised fortunes on the strength of his unshakable narrative. This isn't limited to Western corporate boardrooms. Masayoshi, son of Japan's SoftBank, once lost tens of billions in failed ventures, yet maintained the confidence of investors through sheer force of personality. The pattern is repeated in political systems as well. In Brazil, political positions were frequently filled through personal allegiance rather than proven ability. In Zimbabwe, under Mugabe, loyalists replaced experts, triggering economic devastation. What's happening here is more than just a pattern of bad hires. It's the institutionalization of incompetence. Machiavelli warned of this when he advised that a ruler's intellect could be judged by the quality of those around him. Weak leaders, threatened by ability in others, deliberately surround themselves with weaker minds. This is not just insecurity, it is strategic. By selecting subordinates who pose no threat, they preserve their position and prevent internal challenges. Over time, entire systems become stacked with mediocrity. Organizational psychologist Dr. Thomas Chamorro Premusic calls this phenomenon competence threatening. In such systems, loyalty outweighs skill, and questioning authority becomes an act of rebellion. Rome's decline under Emperor Commodus wasn't just due to one man. It was a cascade of appointments made not for merit, but for flattery. In modern bureaucracies, the same pattern replicates. Capable professionals are sidelined in favor of compliant allies. The cost isn't just inefficiency, it's a decay of institutional memory, foresight, and adaptability. At its worst, this system cultivates what scientists call homophily, a tendency for leaders to promote others like themselves. This creates insular power clusters where conformity is rewarded, dissent is punished, and reality becomes a carefully managed illusion. Even when people sense something is wrong, the system's complexity shields it from accountability. And yet, the allure of simplicity continues to dominate. We still elevate those who offer absolute answers, even when those answers are wrong. This craving for certainty, even at the cost of truth, reveals a dangerous vulnerability embedded deep within our psychology. Even when inept leaders gain power through overconfidence and illusion, their rise is only half the story. The more insidious question is, how do they stay in power? Here, Machiavelli's most unsettling observations become relevant. In The Prince, he writes, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." This insight reveals a fundamental strategy used by weak leaders to secure their position. Surround yourself with people even less competent than you are, not better thinkers. Not those who will challenge or sharpen your ideas, but flatterers, sycophants, and loyalists who ask no difficult questions. This creates what organizational theorists refer to as a competence drought, where each layer of leadership is chosen less for skill and more for pliability. When everyone in the chain of command is selected for submission, not strength, accountability disappears. The result is a hollow structure, externally impressive, internally fragile. History offers countless examples, from Commodus's to Mugabe's Zimbabwe. Power was preserved through systematic pruning of talent, but psychological manipulation extends beyond personnel choices. Weak leaders often entrench themselves through identity fusion, the process by which a leader binds their personal identity to that of their followers. Once achieved, any criticism of the leader becomes a threat to the group itself. To challenge the person in charge feels like an attack on the tribe, the family, or the nation. This dynamic has been observed in cults, authoritarian regimes, and populist movements across continents. In Malaysia, Prime Minister Najib Razak leveraged ethnic nationalism to secure loyalty despite mounting corruption charges. Brazil under Bolsonaro exhibited this fusion in reverse. Rational dissent was reframed as betrayal. The emotional fuel that powers this manipulation is tribalism. Once the group is emotionally fused with the leader, facts become irrelevant. As Orwell put it, doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously, and accepting both of them. In these environments, leaders can deny what they said the day before, contradict established facts, and still be believed, because belief is no longer rational. It is identity-based. Another tactic is chaos. Incompetent leaders often overwhelm the public with crisis after crisis, scandal after scandal. The constant barrage induces what psychologists call cognitive overload. When our mental bandwidth is consumed by outrage, confusion, or the latest controversy, we become less capable of critical thinking. We're too exhausted to verify, too distracted to resist. In this state, people stop asking if things are true. They simply react to what feels urgent. Meanwhile, truth becomes slippery. Weak leaders frequently shift narratives, reframe past decisions, and rewrite history as they go. In this fog of contradiction, accountability becomes impossible. As Machiavelli noted, the vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar. He wasn't expressing elitism, but diagnosing a flaw in human nature, our collective susceptibility to spectacle over substance, certainty over nuance. Economic insecurity is another pressure point exploited by manipulative leaders. When people feel vulnerable, when jobs are scarce, savings evaporate, or futures are uncertain, they become more receptive to simplistic solutions. In such moments, someone who promises a clear enemy or a one-step fix gains an almost messianic appeal. From post-Soviet oligarchs to industrial towns gripped by globalization, the pattern is consistent. In times of fear, people are drawn not to nuance, but to certainty, not to competence, but to control. These tactics, tribalism, cognitive overload, identity fusion, moral relativism, form a toolkit of power maintenance for the unqualified. They don't require skill or vision, just audacity, repetition, and an accurate understanding of human weakness. The troubling truth is that they work, and the longer they are used, the more normalized they become. But this isn't the end of the story. There is a counter-strategy, a set of principles that can resist this downward pull that begins with both individual clarity and systemic redesign. If incompetence and manipulation thrive under certain conditions, then the solution must be to alter those conditions. The problem isn't just individual, it's structural. Just as the wrong environment can elevate the wrong people, a well-designed system can elevate the right ones. Machiavelli understood this duality. He wasn't glorifying corruption. He was documenting how power actually behaves. And in doing so, he left clues for how we might reverse the trend. Start with feedback. In environments where the consequences of failure are immediate and unmistakable, incompetence cannot hide. A surgeon who botches procedures, an engineer whose buildings collapse. These individuals cannot rely on charm or certainty to obscure results. Their domains are governed by direct, unforgiving outcomes. But in fields where outcomes are delayed, vague, or easily reframed politics, media, finance, accountability dissolves. As Nassim Taleb said, if you see fraud and do not say fraud, you are a fraud. These opaque spaces allow the performance of competence to replace the reality of it. The structure of power also matters. Highly centralized systems, with weak oversight and minimal transparency, are ideal breeding grounds for manipulative leaders. The collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't just a story of economic failure, it was a case study in how centralized control, unchallenged by internal dissent, produces a brittle foundation. In contrast, Germany's dual-board corporate governance model, which separates management from oversight, provides an institutional check that balances vision with verification. Information asymmetry is another battleground. When the criteria for success are clear and measurable, deception becomes harder to maintain. But when performance can be hidden behind jargon or complexity, style trumps substance. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. Machiavelli wrote, "For everyone can see a thing, but few can understand it." Leaders who dazzle rather than deliver rely on this principle to maintain their illusion. It's why educational systems must teach more than knowledge. They must teach discernment. Short-term incentives further erode quality. If reward structures prioritize immediate wins over long-term integrity, leaders will optimize for optics, not outcomes. The 2008 financial crash was a warning. Executives reaped rewards while masking systemic risk. The crisis wasn't just about greed, it was about incentives. When leaders are paid for short-term gains, the system selects for those who can manipulate the present, regardless of the future. But even in flawed systems, individuals have agency. The first defense is intellectual humility, the ability to admit what we don't know. Studies show that intellectually humble individuals are more resistant to manipulation and more likely to revise their beliefs in the face of new evidence. As philosopher Bertrand Russell once advised, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Next is media discernment. In a world flooded with information, choosing what to ignore is as vital as choosing what to consume. Warren Buffett put it succinctly. The difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. We must apply this filter not just to our time, but to our attention. Spectacle is the enemy of depth. Reflection completes the triad. Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius practiced daily introspection to protect against reactive thinking. In Meditations, he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Wisdom requires retreating from noise long enough to examine what truly matters. It isn't a passive act. It's a discipline of resistance. At the institutional level, 3 principles hold promise. Robust accountability mechanisms that don't bend to charisma. Cognitive diversity that interrupts groupthink, and enforced transparency that prevents leaders from hiding behind ambiguity. These aren't utopian ideals. They're design strategies that align with how human psychology really works. Machiavelli concluded that it is not titles that honor people, but people who honor titles. He wasn't advocating for darkness, he was revealing it, so that others might see it clearly. The path forward begins with understanding that intelligence alone is not enough. Without courage, it is silent. Without design, it is irrelevant, but with both, it becomes our strongest tool for shaping systems where merit, not manipulation, determines who leads. So ask yourself, what kind of leader do you follow? And why? What kind of thinker do you want to be? The answers to those questions will shape more than your perspective. They'll shape the kind of world we build next.